Hey everyone, my name is Nick Lambert. I'm the CEO of Doc, and welcome to our latest event. Today we are going to be joined by three panelists, which I'll introduce in a short while. Today we're going to be talking about mobiles driver's licenses, or mDLs for their digital form, and how we expect them to change ID verification. The guests are very distinguished today, and we're lucky to have them. So we have Angelique McClendon. She's General Counsel at the Georgia Department of Driver Services. We have Carolyn Mannis Sorensen, who's the founder of ScaviDev. She is also the lead for Secure Technology Alliance Working Group for mDL adoption in banking and in financial services. And last but by no means least, we have Deepankar Saxena, who is the Director of Product at Secure. Secure is one of the kind of market leading identity verification providers focusing in the digital space, and of course myself moderating. In terms of context, before we get right into it with the panel, mDLs are gaining a lot of traction in the US. There's about 30 or so states that are in some way, shape or form kind of either piloting or deploying this technology. And I think at least ChatGPT tells me, which is obviously a great source, and hopefully our expert panelists will confirm if their reading of that's the same as ChatGPT's. But apparently there's almost kind of about 900,000 credentials actually issued by the state of Arizona. But there's 12 states are actively issuing right now. mDL use is also being kind of used by the TSA in some airports as well in terms of the immigration within the US. And it's delivered in many forms as well. So we have some states working on their own applications that enable holders to present and store these mDLs. But also we have the big incumbents of Google, Apple, I think Samsung as well, all trying to get in on the act with their own applications and integrating mDLs in there. So there's a ton of activity in the space, but it's a really exciting time to be talking about this. In terms of today's event, we're looking at around about an hour, 45 minutes or so of kind of panelist Q&A. And then if you're in the audience, thank you for joining us. If you do want to ask questions, just please type them into the Riverside app. And Francisco, who is helping behind the scenes as our head of content, he will consolidate them, and then we'll ask them to the panelists at the end, and we'll get through as many as we can within the time that we have available. I think that's about us. And and if you could also state in the chat where, just to let us know that you're there, because it's good for us to know that there's other people kind of watching, and also where you're listening from. That'd be really helpful. So getting into it now. So if each of the guests would be kind enough just to give a short intro to yourself. Would you want to go Carolyn first, then Deepankar, and then hopefully by the time your phone's reconnected, Angelique will come back to you.
That's just what I was going to suggest. So my name is Carolyn Mannis Sorensen. I'm an advisor and consultant in digital identity and access management. I come from a background in financial services and really just have a passion for customer protection and how can we create better technology and solutions to protect individuals as well as businesses. So that's kind of been my motivator. And like you said, I've been part of the Secure Technology Alliance for about a year and a half now, focused on mobile driver's license adoption. And I'm leading a working group that's focused on banking and financial services in particular. Obviously, there's lots of different use cases and benefits and things that we're hoping for with mobile driver's license, but obviously prevention of fraud, greater customer experiences, cutting waste and cost in financial services is big motivator. So that's what I'm hoping we'll talk more about today.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. Deepankar, over to you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Deepankar Saxena. I've worked with Secure. We are an identity verification and fraud prevention company, and I head the doc verification product and mobile SDKs for Secure. Been in the payments and fraud industry for almost 10 years now. Used to be a software engineer, built payment services and systems, and then as a product person for Secure. And just from a personal standpoint, I love that the problem that we are solving in the industry. I have had people telling me stories on when their identities get stolen, or on when the issues people had to face. And when I get up every day and see what the impact that we have on the problems we are solving, that's what keeps us going as a company, and that's what keeps me going. So pretty excited with all the advancements happening in the industry with mDLs. So very, very excited to talk about this today.
Perfect. Yeah, and we're glad to have you with us. Thank you. So maybe we can jump into the questions, Carolyn, and maybe put this one your way first. Really just to help. I think most of the audience will probably have some understanding of what mDLs are, but maybe you could let us know a little bit about that from your perspective, and also how are they different from the traditional physical IDs that we're all so used to carrying about in our wallets today?
So I can take a stab at it, and Angelique, I think, will, as an issuer or representative of the state agency, will have an even better understanding of the differences and what it means. But conceptually, I think we're looking to take the benefits of the process and the authority of state agencies to manage and define the identity attributes as well as your legal identity, and make that consumable in a digital format. So some of the things we struggle with in physical driver's licenses are things like they can be lost, they can be stolen. In today's technology space, they can be forged, they can be AI generated. So authenticity becomes a real challenge. And the transmission of a driver's license from a physical format into a digital channel, into a digital interaction, while it's gotten a lot better with document verification and selfie matches, is still high friction, high error. So we're looking at the vision of mobile driver's license as a way to utilize that chain of trust, right, in the individual, in the legal identity, and create a native digital representation that individuals can share with consent, with selective disclosure of attributes in a way that's secure, a way that protects them, and a way that protects businesses, and gives them that authoritative, verified, untampered set of data that can be used for all kinds of services and as the starting point for a relationship.
Very good. Yeah, it's a very full answer. So just if you'd be kind enough, Angelique, just if you could give a kind of short intro to yourself, and then
sure.
And then after that, Carolyn started to kind of outline a little bit about the differences between the physical mDLs that we're all familiar with, and then these digital versions that we're starting to use. So maybe you could give a short introduction and then just start to talk through the differences that you're seeing between these two formats.
Sure. I'm Angelique McClendon, General Counsel here at the Georgia Department of Driver Services. So in Georgia, our Department of Driver Services, we only issue driver's licenses. So we're the DMV part that only issues driver's licenses. And the Department of Revenue will deal with tag and title. So we're solely focused on the person and identity. I've been here almost 10 years in this role. I'm also very active with AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. I'm current chair of the mDL subcommittee and a member of the Identity Management Steering Committee. And I've been immersed in this particular world with mDL at least since 2016, 2017.
Fantastic. It's definitely fair to say you're qualified to be here, Angelique.
Yeah, and I have a genuine interest in it. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, fantastic. And then getting into those differences, Angelique, Carolyn talked a little bit about, some of the benefits that it offers the individual in terms of kind of ownership over their driver's licenses. But maybe you could give your take on some of the kind of big differences that you're seeing between a kind of hard copy mDL and a kind of a digital version. Maybe Carolyn, we can go into, so you gave us some of the ideas of the difference. I guess the other difference I'd see as well is how we store them as well. That, and we'll maybe get into this as we go down, but we have this notion now that everyone seems to be obsessing about digital wallets, and I know I certainly do. And so you have the physical versions that purses or wallets everyone carries around. Of course, you have the digital versions that are traditionally stored on within apps on our mobile devices. So I guess that would be another significant difference that we're seeing today as well, and the difference between the two.
Absolutely. So the idea of taking the physical idea of a container where you're putting different cards, I guess you could say, right? Different representations of membership, of legal identity, of payment proof into a secure container. definitely has a parallel into the digital world that I think is pretty natural for people to understand, and fits well in use cases where you're saying, hey, can you present a proof to me, or can you show me your ID? That's something that we're all pretty familiar with the idea of, and taking a natural progression into how do you do that digitally with the security of cryptography, with the security of selective disclosure, audit trails, and being fully compliant is a really natural transition, I think, for a lot of people. So I would say, even though, those of us in digital identity access management are kind of obsessed with digital wallets and verifiable credentials, the regular person is not, right? Their obsession is just living their life and being able to access services. And if we have something that fits naturally with what they're used to doing, but also gives them, benefits of convenience and privacy, I think that's really kind of what they're looking at. That, whether it's in a wallet or not is probably not a big deal to any given individual, even though we're kind of obsessing about them. But making sure, and I think that's really the key to this, right? Is everybody has to have a stake in it. It has to be convenient to use. It has to make sense in the user experience for us to see real adoption.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, some of those key benefits there, like you mentioned, I sometimes think, obviously, convenience is a big thing. And I sometimes think it demonstrates itself consistently is that your garden variety end user, they care much more about convenience than they do about security. I think security is very much an afterthought for them. So I think from their perspective, if I can speak for them, it's really going to be about, is it kind of, is it one tap and I can go? I think that's the kind of level of convenience that users are looking for. And certainly some of those benefits could be available to them kind of using mDLs. Deepankar, coming over to you from your side and your kind of work at Socure, what opportunities are you seeing for mDLs presenting for identity verification providers and obviously to your clients as well? How are you seeing this change the landscape for your business?
I think it's a very big change and a very positive change for us, especially the fact that we do deal with a lot of the frauds every day. And with mDLs giving a secure way of checking the signature, or with basic PKI architecture, you can actually, it just make it very easier for us to make it simple and fast for users to onboard, and also makes it much more secure in a way that a lot of the fraudsters, it's going to make it difficult for them to get through the system. So for a very good user, it just makes it so significantly faster. And the user experience, as we have seen, I think I was trying it on TSA when I was taking a flight, it's so convenient, and you have the control on what you are sharing, which is a very big factor versus someone just you handing out your ID. Someone is making copies, and we have no idea what's happening. In this case, you actually have really good control on what you are sharing, which is something that I really love.
In what ways does it make it more secure, Deepankar, using a kind of digital mDL? We talked about copies of the physical versions, but in what ways does the digital version improve that? Like, why is it more secure?
So, one, and I think Angelique can speak a lot on this. She can talk on this the whole day, I know, pretty sure. So, but yes, so I'll let Angelique speak on it, but I'll just kick it off. So, one, it has a public key, a private key signatures. So basically, when it's on your device, it's stored in your device with a signature, and you have an authority which is just validating those signatures to making sure that this is a valid issued driving license and not someone just copy pasting it or making a dummy out of it. That is a power of cryptography, which helps to make sure that what you're verifying is actually issued by an authoritative source. That's what makes it so much better, so much secure. And as I said, it's giving a stamp from the issuing authority every time you are actually verifying it. So, Angelique, I know you are here now to speak on it.
Yeah, happy to speak while I can. But thank you. So I love that technical aspect of it, right? To talk about the data minimization part, the cryptography. But, on just a general level, when I'm speaking to relying parties or members of the public, I always use, especially if I'm doing a slide or something, I would I would show an actual screenshot of my actual mDL. Like, I would never show a huge copy of my physical driver's license, right? Because you can see all that information. And, if I drop my driver's license somewhere in public, someone picks that up, there is no cryptography, there's no biometric protection, there's no passcode protection, no protection at all for all of your important information. And we are so used to flashing our physical card and giving the clerk at the grocery store or the pharmacy all of our information, and they don't really need all of that information. So that's the common way to answer, the less technical way to answer that I answer the question about privacy. How is it more secure? It's so much more secure and so much more verifiable than those physical credentials.
Very good. Yeah, and I guess as well, to feed into that, Angelique, that will be a person-to-person situation, but I'd imagine that gets even greater when it becomes a digital interaction as well. So let's say I'm submitting information now to a website where that information is likely stored. If you're able to some way limit the amount of information you're sharing, then that's all to the good as well. So we'd see that in a digital, like online use, as well as the in-person use case, like you mentioned.
Right, and especially online use, that is the hero use case for mDLs, online use.
Yeah, very much agreed. And Deepankar, going back to you again about the, we're kind of talking through about the kind of the opportunities that exist. There'll be a lot of people that are interested in the business of this as well. Of course, we have the use and we're trying to serve markets, but of course, in order to do that, businesses will be interested in revenue opportunities as well. Where are you seeing new use cases around mDLs, and are you seeing kind of new and emerging business models around the use of mDLs?
So I think it's going to be a much faster and cheaper verification way with mDLs. And I think first, for places where the verification process has been slower or a lot of friction, that is the first business use case here. Because and also with it using a low energy Bluetooth technology, it can also work in offline use cases too. In example can be ID checks at the bar is like the easiest thing. You can just tap it and you're done. Sporting events where you have to actually move pretty quick and you do not have so much leeway to spend time on verification. And so it's just one of those things which I call it a bartender check. It's like, cool, good. That's what has been happening, and that makes this mDL makes it much more secure in a way. Also, I think, and I've seen some use cases being used on large value money transactions. This is a very secure or very good way of attesting that this person is someone who's actually asking for the money transfer is actually who they say they are. So there are a lot of use cases which I'm seeing coming up, and but the big one is also in-store use cases, which makes it two devices just like talking and validating an ID. So in-person use case is something I'm seeing a big request from our customers, at least, asking that they can add this to their arsenal.
Fantastic. And are those low energy use cases, are they like kind of running through Bluetooth or something like that, Deepankar?
Yes.
Yeah. That's interesting. What about you guys, like Angelique and Carolyn? I know it's not maybe an area, I mean, you'll be exposed to this stuff as well. Are you seeing other new use cases besides the ones that the Deepankar was just mentioning?
So I can just echo what we're hearing back from folks in banking and financial services, that some of the primary factors that they're looking at is, and this is based on surveys and feedback that we're getting from the industry, that as Angelique also mentioned, that online services and online verification processes are kind of top of mind. We have some theories about, why is that the most beneficial, but I think we can, guess that scale and automation are most valuable in the verification online. If you are coming into a branch or you're coming into a situation where you're in person, you're probably already going to have an interaction with the human. So it's not that there's no value there. It's just from a scaling perspective, I think that's where people do see a tremendous amount of value. And the use cases that seem to be primarily of interest would be obviously the KYC onboarding that he spoke of, the high risk authorization of transaction, and there is some interest in the idea of a single sign-on. I know that we're seeing that in some of the government services. So in California, they have, as well as I think Arizona, they have use cases where if you as an individual resident need to go in and renew your license or change some data or look at your title or any of those sort of DMV services, that you're able to do that online with a login using your mobile driver's license as that sort of authenticator app. So maybe that's a little bit of something that I don't know if people necessarily saw originally as they were looking at a digital verification process, but now it's also enabling access through single sign-on types of transactions with access to government services and eliminating passwords and, creating those kinds of experiences as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for the extra context. Angelique, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think Carolyn already mentioned government services. And so it goes beyond just the DMV, right? It could be taxes. That's really an old, almost an original use case for tax returns, filing taxes. Any services where you would need to verify your identity. Currently, we do a lot of data exchanges intergovernmentally because a lot of government services need to verify identity, and it's to make it convenient so the customer doesn't have to repeat the same thing they told Department of Revenue. They would have to also tell the same information to driver services when driver services has that information. I mean, that's just one example. But interestingly enough, real estate transactions, there's a lot of real estate fraud, a lot of deed fraud. I spoke to a group of realtors just Monday about identity verification. And a lot of it was awareness about fraud and identity fraud. And then, of course, I mentioned mDL. I talked a lot about that. There was pure excitement over, wow, you can do this. And then it gets to, well, how can we consume that? How can we consume that digital driver's license or ID card? So there are use cases that sort of come to mind all the time. It's an emerging topic, but the use cases are endless. And they're, the initial thought is, well, wherever you're presenting your ID now, right? Whoever asks for your ID now, they could benefit from this. This is a use case. But also there are instances, especially when it comes to online presentment, where you might not be asked to present your ID. But if there is some form of online presentment for mDL, then those become use cases also. Because like Carolyn said, it's scalable, it's more convenient, and it works in that form. So, and scale is very, very important. And so I could talk about that all day.
That's a great answer. I wonder as well, because I know a lot of these things, maybe some of the early use cases can be driven by government, regardless of what jurisdiction you're in. But I think that if that's all they ever get used for, they will be underutilized. And I think it's trying to get a good blend of private and public use cases is really what's going to drive these to be commonly used by everyone. It certainly seems that there's a lot happening. Coming back to you again, Angelique, we've talked about a lot of the really interesting use cases. You mentioned there being a lot of them as well. Are you seeing what kind of barriers to adoption are you seeing can take a bit more of a negative tack on it? What are the things that are inhibiting this technology being adopted?
Well, naturally, awareness, right? So we might have 4,000 users currently, 400,000, I'm sorry, users currently. And it's great. Those are people who are interested in it, excited about it. But then there are still some people who are unaware that it even exists. So first there's awareness, but then it's to get relying parties. Like you said, it's great to have government relying parties, but you really want a variety of relying parties, private sector relying parties. So really to get those relying parties to come aboard. That to me has been the biggest hurdle across jurisdictions. I think it's going to take a lot of collaborative effort, right? So entities who would be maybe seen as competitors would probably have to collaborate to make sure that everyone has access to a way to consume the MDL. It takes collaboration across jurisdictions. So Arizona, maybe they have 800,000. Maybe Maryland has a different number. Maybe Georgia has a different number. Colorado has a different number. But for instance, a nationwide bank would want to know, well, how many users are there nationwide versus just in Georgia, just in Arizona. It doesn't benefit them to know how many one jurisdiction has. They would want to know collectively, how can this benefit my business collectively? So it's going to take a lot of cross jurisdiction, cross industry collaboration, and there is enough room, I believe, in the MDL ecosystem for all of these entities, government and private, who some could be competitors or seen as competitors, but I really believe it's going to take a collaborative effort to get the MDL to take off and get that movement going and keep it going, keep the momentum.
Very good. And just to pick up on the figure you gave, Angelique, is that 400,000 MDLs issued in Georgia?
Yes, total.
Got it. Okay, yeah, very good.
Yeah, currently we have Apple. We launched with Apple in 2023, in May of 2023. And a few months later, we launched with Google, while in any day now, we will be launching with Samsung.
Very good. Awesome. Fantastic.
And I can add a little bit of feedback from the financial services industry, and just what people are giving us feedback on of, what is a barrier? What would stop them from adopting? And kind of to what Angelique was saying, adoption is a big focus area. Are there enough people out there with mobile driver's license? This is, of course, that catch-22 kind of situation where, nobody has them because there's nowhere to use it, and so forth. But I think the momentum and now the acceleration has really taken off in the past couple of years. So you've seen, some of the really large states. So in addition to early adopting states like Georgia, Utah, Arizona, you're seeing some of the highly populated states also coming online, with California and Virginia and New York. And that's really just been in the past year that we're seeing a lot of that acceleration. And so, I think I've actually seen statistics that there's over 5 million mobile driver's licenses that have been issued. And so, while I acknowledge the fact that there is hesitation, or there is focus on is there enough adoption in the individual space to make this worth it, I think what we're seeing is an incredible acceleration of adoption and willingness to try out some of these new experiences, to utilize it for travel, and some of the live production use cases. But the other thing that we do get mentions of as a question or a blocker is, how does this fit into my regulatory framework? And there's been some great studies with OpenID Foundation, for example, looking at across a whole variety of service providers, what are their questions or what are their concerns? And, how does this fit into my regulatory space is a big one. And so I think work done by NIST to talk to financial regulators like FDIC and FINRA to make sure that customer identification programs include mobile driver's license as part of those types of programs and as an acceptable way of gathering and verifying individuals. That's a really important part of it. I know that states are working with their departments of alcohol and beverage to make sure from that angle, people know that that's an acceptable way to verify an individual and create your audit trail. So I think there's a lot of things going on and a lot of progress being made in that regulatory space to make sure that service providers know that the use of mobile driver's licenses is aligned with their regulatory compliance.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's really interesting. And Deepankar, bringing you back into the conversation then, and talking about maybe challenges from your side as well. I don't know if you're seeing them as the same, but just to a different audience. But what are the challenges that you're seeing trying to maybe educate your customers about the changes that are coming, and then also helping them, or integrating them into your solutions, and then potentially integrating into their solutions? Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you're facing or have faced.
Yes. So there is a curve, there's an adoption curve for every technology. And like when we had the wallets for payments, there was still people carrying cash. You still have to give multiple ways for our customers to accept ways of identification. So you cannot just shut off everything. But I was just talking to someone, there was a point people were still carrying cash, and now it's a point people get like mad if someone doesn't accept Apple Pay. So that has come to that point. So it's just a curve in the adoption, which we are looking and observing as to how much people would move towards mDLs if given an option versus how many will still carry an ID. So I think it's just more about that adoption curve is about user experience, which people need to understand that this is going to be much better user experience from versus taking out your ID and scanning and etc. So it's those, but from an IDV perspective, you still have to give multiple options, figure out and see and observe how the adoption goes up for these verifications. So this is where we are trying to provide multiple options to a point where the adoption grows much, much higher.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Angelique, it sounds like you're definitely working down at the grassroots. You're speaking to lots of different kind of departments and groups and trade bodies maybe within Georgia. You talked a little bit about the, I guess we call them estate agents, but people in charge of kind of letting in buildings and things like that, and IDing for those premises. What are the common myths that you're coming across with regards to mDLs?
Well, common myth that they aren't as secure. I'll give you a perfect example. I was traveling recently. I did what a lot of us do, left my key card in my hotel room, went to the front desk. Hey, need a new key card? Well, can I see your ID? I would if I had it. I don't have it. It's in my purse that's in my room. Well, let me see your conference badge. Okay, well, if you accepted digital ID, I could show you my ID on my phone. But here's my conference badge. And then he says, yeah, that's better. The conference badge is better because someone could steal your phone. And I'm like, I could go to your business center and print out my conference badge. So there's a myth that because it's on the phone for some reason that is less secure. There's the myth that the government is tracking you because we have access to where you now use your ID or your driver's license. We do not track. That is, and that's even in the standards for AMVA, the guidelines for AMVA as well. States do not want to track your usage. We honestly don't have the bandwidth to track our customers and where they go. At the DMV, we don't. We're not interested in that. But there is some fear out there. Of course, there's Big Brother, that type of talk, surveillance, tracking, less secure. Those are the huge myths. And even what it looks like. Well, why doesn't it have your information on there? There's at least one solution that is still sort of what we call a flash pass in one jurisdiction, but they'll probably move away from that. But that helped them with adoption because they were very, very, very early adopters. Yeah. And so there's that thought about it too. And I'm always comparing it to payments, right? And so if you look at your credit cards in your wallet, they sort of look like your debit card, sort of look like your credit card, but there's no information on there that anyone can use by just looking at it. You have to actually consume it and verify it. But the myths are that, it should look like the driver's license, it's some sort of surveillance going on, and it's less secure. Those are the biggest ones that we hear about.
That was a great story you told as well, how it's easier to steal a phone than it is to steal a pass and then turn it on and show it. But it just shows you the kind of mindset that there's some people get into. And I suppose as well, when we're in this industry where we know about the kind of, at least not a deep level maybe, but we understand there's cryptography involved and how things are signed and all of that stuff, we get a good sense. But I kind of sometimes feel a little bit for, I don't know, want to speak down on people, but it's people that maybe are not as familiar with technology and it's not their line of work. Probably some of them have right to be somewhat skeptical of tracking and things because of all of the stuff that we've gotten used to with whether it's a large corporation or it's government tracking and stuff. It's kind of been beaten into us over a long period of time. And that's what gets us so excited as practitioners, that we know that it stops this. but probably it's not unreasonable to have kind of users of this technology who are not familiar be scared about that. It's probably a reasonable thing to worry about, I guess. I don't know if you guys have any kind of myths, Carolyn or Deepankar, that you've come across?
Well, I can jump in just in the information game and how to continually provide information to individuals. So at the Secure Technology Alliance, we also acknowledge that challenge around how do you make people feel comfortable with the idea of their data being captured and the selective disclosure, and try and enhance their understanding of why is this a benefit to them. So there's actually a pretty usable infographic that we've developed and would be happy to share with the audience, just to say, here are some of those key concerns around, just as Angelique was saying, like, is it secure on my device? What if I lose my phone? Is someone tracking me? Can it be forged? Can people create fake ones? And it answers a lot of those questions with the technology that's being used to prevent that manipulation and the cloning and forging and all those kinds of security concerns that an individual would have, just to make sure that we're communicating, we're acknowledging, number one, acknowledging that people have concerns about, and why shouldn't they, right? All they read about is how their data is being leaked. There's this data breach and that data breach. And so that's obviously top of mind. And even though people are driven by the convenience, as we said before, I do think they think about security, and they do think about how to protect themselves. And so if they're informed about what the technology is behind it and the purpose of it and who's in control of it, which is them, the hope would be that they're getting more used to that idea that this is something that's put in place to be a benefit to their security and to their privacy.
Yeah, great. And if you can share that with us, Carolyn, I'm sure we'd be happy to distribute that through our own social channels as well, because, happy to try and get the word out as much as possible. We talked about kind of use cases, but we talked also about the kind of maybe things that are to come, but we also talked about maybe some of the use cases that exist today. I know that some airports are accepting this. I think Deepank, you mentioned a couple as well. Where specifically in a practical sense is it possible today to be using mDLs that you guys are hearing about? Are there any kind of interesting pilots going on? Can you illustrate a little bit about that?
And it might be a little bit more regional today, just because, as a state issuing agency, I think it probably makes sense to make contact with businesses that are in your region or in your jurisdiction. But I know, so I'm a resident of Utah, and we have use cases, as you mentioned, for travel and TSA, and that's probably the widest interoperable use case, where different licenses from all the different states are being used. But here locally, we have a state liquor store that is adopting verification. They've been working with some of the local grocery stores and I think real estate industry, and looking for opportunities where maybe at that small scale, they're demonstrating how useful it is. We've even seen the America First Credit Union and I think Utah Community Credit Union have made it available in some of their branches, so that if you're going up to talk to a teller to perform a transaction, you can use a mobile ID as your verification instead of taking out a physical card. So there's definitely real life use cases that people are interacting with today. And I think that's so important in providing that initial feedback in continuing to develop and make it better.
Very good. Thank you. And then at a regional level in Georgia, Angelique, are you seeing are there kind of pilots underway there that you're able to tell us about that are exploring some interesting use cases?
Right, that I'm able to tell you about. That's the key.
That's the tricky one, right, with new technology, right, isn't it?
Right. TSA is definitely a wide use case, right? And so another pilot we're doing internally is we are demonstrating mDL as a quick pass or a fast pass, if you will, for check-in. Because one issue we had with our check-in process is that we send people, either you can fill out the application online ahead of time, or you can go to what we call our tech decks, which are Chromebooks attached to stations at our locations. So we thought, well, we already know that information about these people who are coming in, who are renewing. or replacing. What if they could tap something with their MDL and that would pre-populate all the information and they can just confirm whether or not any of that needs to change. And that took our check-in time, takes it down from about 10 minutes to about 2 or 3 minutes. And so that is a small scale pilot. We're working with Credence ID on that particular pilot. And again, we're open to other scalable solutions, but that is something that solved a problem for us. And it also, as Carolyn mentioned, demonstrates that it's not just a novelty on your phone, something that looks great or that looks cool. It actually works and has purpose and efficiency and good purpose.
Yeah, there's a great real world benefit there. That sounds really good.
Right.
And Deepankar, from you talked a little bit about in terms of the impact it has in the verification process. You kind of mentioned, I think you talked about the kind of bar use. I forget the exact phrasing, but the kind of notion of touch and click or touch and access. Are you seeing something similar online? Where are you seeing this having either a positive impact, I guess, upon online verification processes? How do you see that changing with MDLs?
Yeah, we are still exploring some of the online verification use cases. This, I think, from what we have talked to people, this has been a great. We have gotten great feedback on in-person use cases because it just works seamlessly. The in-person use case. I have seen how California DMV is doing their login with a QR code scanning and how they are using the standards to validate that. So yes, we are trying to understand, analyze how this could be used for online use cases. It's I just to echo what Angelique said, it's pretty cool. I have to say that. So it's so much better than a lot of the things we have seen. So it's pretty cool. So yes, we're exploring it on onboarding scenarios. Of course, as Karen mentioned, we are looking at how that plays into your CIP process, because you still there are other CIP requirements which would also be a part of your onboarding from a financial institution standpoint. But then there are use cases which could be a rental agency or a car rental, or these are use cases which do not have to comply to a lot of these CIP regulations, which you can easily do an online based use cases with MDL. So we are trying to explore a lot of these where on both ends of things, one which requires a lot of regulations, one is which are much simpler. But I think from leaving in the online one side, but also, as I think I saw someone in the chat also mentioning, like a lot of the alcohol deliveries, a lot of the deliveries of restricted substances, and so a lot of these things which could be a very quick adoption for MDLs, which is what we are also trying to push for some of our customers to see if they can pilot in these cases to just do that. It's just, as I said, it's one of the ways we have to provide and see how people react to it. Of course, people are used to seeing an ID in hand. If it doesn't look like an ID, it's not an ID. That's the notion we are trying to change, that it doesn't have to look like an ID anymore. It could be just a small QR code. That could be your ID.
Yeah, very good. We've talked about how this impacts, companies and to some extent people using it as well. Angelique or Carolyn, what kind of feedback are you guys getting from actual kind of users on the ground? Is that, I'm guessing that's going to be a part of some of these pilots, and if you've issued kind of 400,000 of these MDLs, Angelique, I'm sure you've got some good feedback and maybe some bad feedback as well. But what's the general sense of what people are saying when they're starting to use this technology?
So I'll say, places like Utah really they were early adopters, and they really took the brunt of a lot of the negative feedback, right? The myths and things like that. So my colleagues in Utah really sort of smoothed that out for the rest of the jurisdictions. So we haven't gotten a lot of negative feedback. It's been, people have been excited, but the only, I could maybe say negative feedback is, where else can I use it? I have it. Where can I use it? When I was presenting to those real estate agents and brokers Monday, a couple people, one person in particular, downloaded it as I was talking. He's like, I did it. It took 2 minutes, and he's like, where can I use it? And he was so excited about it. Where could he use it? My 82-year-old father, when we first launched with Apple, I'm getting my family all on board because I'm excited. I'm like, this is why I've been traveling and talking and doing all this stuff. So I'm excited about it. And my parents, they downloaded. My dad's 82. He's like, wow, now I can, he has one of those big wallets with lots of things in it. And he's like, now I can leave this at home, like not so fast. So it's the excitement. And then it's like, hold your horses. We're working on that. Where
Yeah.
can you use it? That has been the biggest feedback. I have it. Now what?
And I think interoperability is another big one that's come up as far as are all readers equipped to read all mobile driver's licenses? And if you have a regional implementation that works with the California driver's license, or works with your local driver's license, how do you build that confidence that when someone from a neighboring state that also has an mDL, that they're going to be able to walk in and have the same experience? Because there is variation, right? There's variation in the tech providers that states are working with. There's variation in the types of wallets that are being used, whether that's a native OS wallet or an actual mobile application that people are installing. So I think those are some of the big questions that folks are having, moving to that next step of, okay, I see how this works in the happy path of my particular use case with people from my jurisdiction and my region. What does this look like when you start creating that hybrid variety of different wallets and different issuers? And I think that complexity is a big question that people have, is despite the fact that, yes, we have open standards and we have trust ecosystem programs in place, but that's part of the growing pains. And the way we're trying to address that, I think, in the industry is some of these really great hackathon events that the states have put on, as well as interop events where we're inviting different technology providers, different issuers, different wallet providers to come try and work together to make sure that as we get into that into the wild where there's lots of different varieties of implementations, that they do work well together.
Yeah, and it's important. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, is actually how do governments and private companies work together? I think kind of hackathons and things are just a really good example of that. Are there any aspects, I just can't even see your name now, Deepankar, coming to you once I put my teeth back in. What aspects of this technology would you like to see kind of clarified, if any? Is there still some uncertainty around, it's early days. I think sometimes technology can move ahead of legislative or regulative frameworks. Is there any aspect of this that you would like to see a little bit more definitive kind of guidance around?
So I think there's another version of ISO specs coming out very soon. So we are actually looking forward to seeing what more is being added there for a lot of these use cases. But I think just to echo what Carolyn said, the main thing we are trying to get clarified is how different states are going to adopt it and how the wallets are going to adopt it. Because right now we are seeing every state coming up with their own app, but that becomes a problem when you are trying to solve identity problem for the entire country and not just every state one by one. So that is something which we are trying to work with the states as well. We are working with a lot of states as a company, Secure. So we are trying to work with the states to see how we can help and coordinate with the states to find a path forward where it's working all of us together and not every state working in silos. And I think Amber is doing a pretty good job. I know, Angelique, you're working through with Amber as well. So through a central way of verifying all these credentials. So that is something also we are looking how that can be helpful.
Right. That would be the digital trust service that Amber has. And Osroads in Australia, they're launching their digital trust service as well. So it's not really, we're not just talking about the United States. You have the EU. They're considering pilots. You have Australia. So you have other countries throughout the world that are considering this. Japan had a summit last summer as well. So this is something that's global, and it could really open up transactions, throughout the world globally. And the interoperability is key that Carolyn mentioned. Interoperability is a key part of that.
And I think we've done a lot of work in standardizing the process is between the issuer and the wallet and issuing the credential, the wallet and the verifier and presenting the credential, but there maybe isn't as much standardized around how do you build the governance of the trust ecosystem. And I think it's a great plug for AMVA and the digital trust service that they're setting up, which would allow the issuers to go through an onboarding process to publish their metadata and keys into that central repository. I think they've got 3 states that are in production, ready to go, and others that are in that process, so that as a relying party, from a scale perspective, I can't go to every jurisdiction, every state, and then in the future, every country to make sure I have the correct and appropriate and authorized metadata and credentials. I need an ecosystem. I need authorities to help me navigate the complexity of that interoperability. So I think it's fantastic that we're seeing some of those organizations step up and say, we're going to help organize around this so that relying parties have an easier time consuming because they know where to get the correct ones. And it's so important, right? It's so important that we're using the right credentials, because otherwise you have the risk that someone is able to create fake credentials and have them be accepted by these automated systems. And that's a real risk. And that's something that I think is incredibly important to focus on and get right. And then, as you take a step up, so if you have the US organizing around something like AMVA and you have Australia organizing around Austroads or the EU and UD, there's probably a step up from that too, right? To say, hey, I'm from Sydney and I'm renting a car in Los Angeles. I'd like you to be able to accept my mobile driver's license that was issued by my Queensland state. And that interoperability becomes maybe, that's maybe a little bit further out, but it's good to start thinking about that. And I know there are organizations, I think there's one called GAN that recently has been kicking off with some of those concepts of how do we create trust ecosystems so that relying parties don't have to deal with the huge complexity of deciding who to trust, that they have a governance process and authorities that they can go to make sure they have the right metadata, the right keys, and that they're only accepting true authorized issued credentials.
Yeah, it's a great point. Just as you were talking, I was thinking about GAN, the Global Acceptance Network, and its kind of notion of being the ecosystem of ecosystems. And I was thinking exactly that as you're talking about AMVA and its kind of trust ecosystem or trust registry, and that being in isolation right now, and how much easier it would be if that was part of a bridge to lots of other ecosystems that starts to become quite powerful then. And actually I also appreciate your answer there, Carolyn, because you're ticking off either knowingly or unknowingly some of the audience questions, so you've been a total pro in that answer as well. As we kind of get to kind of wrapping up now, I've got a question actually from Michael. So we have been neglecting people a little bit. So sorry, that's my bad. But I think you were answering some of them, Carolyn. So well done you. Michael's asking, what kind of setup would a business like a hotel need to validate the mDL being shown on the phone as legitimate? And will they need their own hardware to validate the mDL and train their staff, similar to how mDLs are used at the airport check-in? So a multi-part question there. So I don't know who wants to try and pick that one up.
Well, I could just talk basically about how I would envision it. There are a lot of different options, and so there doesn't necessarily have to be new hardware. There could be a software push from whoever point of sales providers are. Those are hero use cases as well, because instead of the individual hotel company or an individual mom and pop store, if your Veriphones, your Equinoxes, and your Squares, and all of those, if that's a part of an update or an upgrade, then it's instantly there. And so you might not necessarily need hardware, but hardware is available as well to integrate into your existing systems. But there's that scalability that Carolyn's talked about, right? So then there's that collaborative effort where some of these providers for readers will need to be flexible and be able to integrate into existing systems. So you have large companies and large corporations who don't have to do, an complete overhaul of their hardware, because that is the hesitancy and that is the fear, that you spend millions of dollars to add this when really it can be a system upgrade. It's possible to be as simple as a system upgrade. And that's my non-technical answer.
It's very welcome.
Yeah, but yes, we are working towards something similar, that we can develop. We are ID verification providers, where we can have a single application which can validate any of these mDLs. That's the goal. That's North Star. That's why we're working with different different DMVs to make sure that we're aligning on that. But a big factor that was mentioned, is very subtle but true, is the training piece of it, because you still have to train people on how to read them, on how to understand them. That needs some work and training. So just want to not neglect that part of it, because even if you had it, a person who has been sitting like in a hotel working for 20 years, been looking at IDs, and suddenly you're asking them to change a way, that needs a little bit of adoption training as well. So just don't want to make sure we don't neglect that part.
Totally agree with that. Thank you for mentioning that, because that is a big hurdle for the existing pilots now. Is that, there's that technical piece of it. You work so hard to get that technology going, but then what? Then there are people who have to drive that technology. And so there's that training piece, and a consistent training and education piece on the part of the people who are actually having to implement it on the ground.
Fantastic. We've run out of time. I appreciate you guys hanging about, because we're just about over, but I really enjoyed the discussion. So thanks to you all for making the time. I hope the audience get a lot out of it. We'll also be distributing the recording in a few days or so, once we've had a chance to do the edit. So thanks again to everyone for taking part, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you so much.
conversation.